Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's episode. Today I have a special guest here. A lot of you guys know him by the name of Mondo Gonzales. Welcome to the episode, brother. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Before we start, because I wanted to, have you on to talk about the red heifers and of course your new book, The Red Heifer Prophecy. Before we start that, for those who don't even know who you are, never heard of you, never heard of Prophecy Watchers, which you're on, which you co-host, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Prophecy Watchers and what you do there?
Yeah, I wasn't raised a Christian, but got saved 18 years old, first year of college, and then really just began to study Scripture and loved prophecy. Right at the got me right in on prophecy, which is great. And then probably about 7, 8 years later, 10 years later, actually, I became a pastor. So I pastored for 16 years in Illinois and Washington State, and then also in Nevada. And then about 3 years ago, God called us to Oklahoma City, and so I am a co-host of the television program, amongst other things that we do at Prophecy Watchers. And we have a monthly magazine, a color magazine, very nice. We're on social media all over the place. Stitton radio, podcasting, and so we're excited. We're excited about the Lord. We have several conferences per year that we do, and it's been a great time coming alongside Gary Stearman, and just trying to help others to see that Jesus is coming soon, and we need to be ready.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And for me, I'm 28. I've been watching Prophecy Watchers for Lord knows how long, 5, 6 years, and I've been immensely blessed by the ministry. And it's been great having you on. Awesome looking at Gary and everything that he's doing as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. So your book, The Red Heifer Prophecy, why did you write it? What was your goal in writing that book? What do you hope for fellow believers to kind of get out of it?
Well, I've been watching the red heifers here and there for the last 30 years, and as some people might not know, think, well, red heifer, what's the big deal about that? And as those that watch prophecy, they understand when we think about the coming of the third temple, there's going to be a third temple that's built. One of the requirements, not by New Testament. The New Testament says there's going to be a third temple built, but the prerequisite that is in the mind of Jewish rabbis is that in order for them to build the temple, they have to perform the red heifer ceremony and slaughter of this cow and burn it, like the book of Numbers, chapter 19 says. So they, of course, they're Jewish rabbis, so they don't believe in the New Testament, so they're thinking in terms of the old covenant, Mosaic covenant. And so as the red heifer was kind of, one is born and then it's disqualified, and I've been watching it like, okay, sometimes you had to wait a few years before one was born. But the thing that changed was in September 15th of 2022, these Jewish rabbis from the Temple Institute and the B'nai Israel organization purchased 5 red cows from a ranch in Texas. And they all arrived on that day in Israel. It's a big fanfare. The press was there. And at the time when I saw this, I thought, you know what? For the average Christian who doesn't really know anything about this, or maybe they're new to prophecy, I said, I'm going to write a book on this because my background in my undergrad is in Jewish studies, so I'm familiar with rabbinic writings. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to kind of write a definitive book explaining the whole background to the third temple, why the Jewish rabbis believe they need the red heifer. And then also I was able to interview all the people that were involved in the bringing of the red heifers over. And so I document all that in the book. I thought this would be really good to share all of this information, and that even if these 5 red heifers never make it to the fire pit, so to speak, they're not giving up. They have breeding programs all over Texas now, and even in Israel. So this isn't going away. And so I thought, I'll write the book, and hopefully it'll be the definitive guidebook for when it does finally happen. And also I wanted as well to address, as Christians, what do we do about it? Do we embrace it, support it? Do we make donations to it? And I wanted to help teach and explain what the New Testament says about the red heifer, and also the Christian response to what that looks like. So I spent several chapters on that. I also interviewed several other people, several other prophecy teachers, and got their opinion because I didn't want them just to have mine. And then I shared their opinions in the book, and then wrote my own. Because I think people misunderstand that if we talk about the red heifer some Christians naturally, they get defensive of Jesus. I mean, look, we all know Jesus is the final sacrifice. I'm not promoting another sacrifice. Jesus is it. But the fact that you talk about what the Jewish rabbis are doing, some Christians can be very upset about that. And they have a knee-jerk reaction at times instead of listening and going, oh, well, he's not promoting it. He's just explaining what they're doing. So that was the main reason why I wanted to write the book, so that people can have a level-headed understanding of what's happening, as well as the history, and also prophetically what we expect to happen. Who knows when, but it's definitely in the works.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for explaining that, because I've been, talking about the red heifer, writing articles on it on my blog for a while now, several years. And I try to bring this view to Christians, kind of like you, of why it's significant. Not necessarily that I personally don't believe that we should be supporting the building of the third temple. And I would like for you to talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of like, okay, telling Christians, why should we pay attention to this, right? Is it just all hubbub and overhype, or is there at least something here that we should be paying attention to? And kind of like what you're saying, what I try to bring to Christians is say that, hey, this is in the Jewish mindset. They believe this is significant for the rebuilding the third temple, and the third temple is significant for this reason. So therefore, Christians should pay attention to it. Is that kind of right?
That's exactly right. The reason why, I have two verses that are kind of my life verses, especially after coming to Prophecy Watchers, but they're good verses. They're commandments that Jesus gave. And one of them is Mark 13:37, where he's talking in the Olivet Discourse, and he's giving the entire scope of when he leaves and he ascends all the way until the second coming. He says, hey, this is what's going to happen here. Because the disciples asked him, what are going to be the signs of your return? And so he gave them a whole litany of information. Then at the end of chapter 13 of Mark, he says, what I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. And so it's a commandment. It's not a suggestion. It's not an option. So we're told to be watching for the signs. And of course, watching also means to be being ready.
Yes.
And part of being ready, right before he gave the Olivet Discourse in Luke chapter 19, verse 13, he's giving the parable of the tenants when the landowner would depart for a while. But it just says, occupy until I come. So the goal is to be watching, but also to be busy in the kingdom work. So this is why I think it's important. And one of the things that we're watching is what Jesus said in Matthew 24:15 and Mark 13, other passages, is that there will be a temple. And I know people as well that get upset because they say, don't you know that the church is the temple? Well, the church is a temple during this age. 1 Corinthians 3:16, we know that. John chapter 2, Jesus talked about his body being the temple. So we understand that, but the Greek word also refers to the physical temple. Mm-hmm. So even though there has been a change within the church age that the Holy Spirit dwells in the church, and 1 Corinthians 6:19, he dwells in our bodies, right? Our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. We know that. But once the church age is over at the rapture, the temple's there. This is not a spiritual temple. This is a real physical temple where Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Mm-hmm. That's not figurative. I know some people try to make it figurative. There's no way to make that figurative. Not only that, but in Revelation 11, John is told to measure the temple with a measuring rod. And he talks about the outer courts. So you can't just spiritualize that all away. Yeah. And unfortunately, some people do. And there are brothers and sisters in Christ. We love them. We just disagree. We think they're interpreting it wrong. So that's why it's important, because as we see all the things happening for the temple being built, everything's done. Yeah. Everything is 100% done. There's just one thing remaining, and that's the red heifer. Yeah. And so the fact that there's 5 red heifers possible, again, I don't predict dates. That's not what I do. But the fact that there's 5 candidates clearly qualified right now shows us how close we are to everything being checked off the box so that they can build the temple.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And the red heifer being significant just because in the mind of the Jews who see this as significant, they want to use those ashes of the red heifer to begin the purification, I believe, to purify all of Israel so they can begin the sacrifice in the third temple, correct?
Absolutely. And they're going to purify the people as well as the location itself, right? I mean, the Temple Mount certainly has been overrun by, non-Jews or unclean, impure. I've been up there, and I'm I'm impure from a ritual sense, so I've contributed
Yeah.
contributed to the contamination.
That makes sense. Yeah. So in terms of the sacrifices themselves, like we're hearing a lot of news recently. And I follow you and Prophecy Watchers on social media, and I love what you guys are doing. Kind of your quick questions, you and Gary, you guys get some questions, answer them. And I know you dealt with kind of a question. I forgot how it was phrased, but it was about like an article or news reports about sacrifices being done and altar being built. So I kind of want you to take some time, maybe answer to us like, what is some news we're seeing out there that maybe isn't accurate or maybe sensational about probably red heifers, sacrifices being done, kind of stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's I appreciate that because there's been so much misinformation, and I don't know how much of it is disinformation, but confusion at least. And what one of the biggest things was when the red heifers were supposed to be offered ceremonially. They, first of all, a couple things. They're not genetically modified, so I know that's a big rumor. Let's just clear that up. They are not genetically modified. There's a full breeding program of red Angus. He's been breeding these for over 40 years. So since the early 80s.
Yeah.
So they're not genetically modified. So that's one thing. The other thing was that they were guaranteed that it was going to happen on Passover. Well, clearly we're past Passover. And in the interviews that I was doing last fall with several people, they talked about Passover between Passover and Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, the Jewish Feast of Weeks, which is June 12th. So they talked about that window, but it doesn't need to be in the window. They were just hoping that, because they were high holidays, that they would do it possibly during that window. Well, when they were talking about that window, that was before October 7th and the attack from Hamas. So once fall came and really January came, and Hamas came out and said, specifically, they mentioned the red cows that are currently in Shiloh. The Israeli government initially was relatively open to the idea of them performing a ceremony on the Mount of Olives. And it's not on the Temple Mount, it's on the Mount of Olives, on private property. But once they went to war, the person there told me very clearly that the Israeli government does not want any attention drawn to the red cows. And so you have all that. So that put it on a delay. Well, then the other thing that happened, which I think was intentional, was a video that was produced by CBS. And they went to Israel. They interviewed Yitzhak Momo on the property of the Mount of Olives. And as they interviewed him, you could tell it was a hit piece on Israel. There was all these subtleties in there about the fact of the red cows causing trouble, and Hamas would have never done what they did if they wouldn't have had the red cows, and which is totally false. Hamas doesn't need that. They would have done what they were going to do apart from the red cows. I think it was just politically convenient to mention the red cows 100 days later. Again, it was way later that they mentioned that. And again, they are, not, hey, we need to pray for them. They need to be saved, but they're very good at propaganda. And this is one of those propaganda moments. And so what happened in that video as well is they said, and I watched it several times to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting it. And the reporter, and I was even call him a reporter, they took old footage of a altar that was built down by the Dead Sea in Mitzvah, Jericho. So it's a place near the city of Jericho. Yeah. And it was an altar that was built long ago that was meant to help to teach the priests about, to practice, rehearse. So that temple that altar was not built. It's not a red heifer altar by any means. But when they showed the picture of it, they must have had this footage from somewhere. They showed the picture of it. They said, the red heifer altar has been built and is ready to go. So they knew that it was a lie. It wasn't built on the property on the Mount of Olives. So they knew that. So this is the kind of stuff that you question the integrity of some of these journalists who put that out there. And what does it do? It inflames the I would say the gullibility of some people to believe it. I remember when I first saw it, I was this close from getting sucked into it because I was like, what? And I ended up calling up Tom Hughes, who happened to be in Israel. And I said, hey, Tom, I saw this video. I don't believe it. There's no way that altar's been built. It doesn't look like the property at all. I said, can you go by the property and make sure? Because he was right there. And so come to find out, we talked to a couple other contacts, Orthodox Jews in the land of Israel, who said, no, that's absolutely not true. So again, here you have, and then people getting sucked in. And then of course, what happens? It just gets replayed all over everywhere. So nobody vetted it before they, not say nobody, very few people vetted it before they played.
Yeah. Yeah, which is unfortunate. So I'm glad for people like you. I know Mir Sarfati's been talking about this as well, kind of debunking, kind of again, what you're saying with Hamas 100 days later, saying that, okay, that's why we attacked because of the red heifers. So people like you are bringing the truth to light. And I'm so glad about that. Obviously, you know, the red heifer is a big part of the preparations for the third temple, but can you also speak to what other things like the Temple Institute and maybe other Orthodox Jews are doing to prepare for the third temple?
Yeah, when Israel gained control of the Temple Mount after the 6-Day War of 1967, a gentleman who he just died actually recently, which was very sad. His name was Gershon Solomon. He was in the military, and after he experienced the liberation, so to speak, of the Temple Mount into Jewish hands for the first time in 1900 years, he established what was known as the Temple Mount Faithful group. And then in the 80s, there was another group, the Temple Institute, which was another group. And there's another thirdtemple.org, .com, another group. So there's many groups that are committed to building Third Temple. And so when you see all this happening, the Temple Institute has probably been the furthest along because they have, when I say everything's ready, I mean the priests are ready. They have all the garments, they have the robes, they have all the implements, they have the golden menorah, which is huge. You can go there and see it. The altar of incense is done. The table of showbread, all in gold, all ready to go. All the copper vessels that are needed. The snails, the blue dyes, music, the harps.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is ready to go. They have meetings regularly where they're training the Levitical choir.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything is there. And the only thing that's missing, again, is the red heifer, or ashes, which is what they need, but also they need the political backing of the government. Okay. And the government, most people don't realize this, but the Israeli government has been mostly, I would say 80% secular, 90% secular, maybe 100% secular, even atheistic, agnostic from the beginning in 1948. So these are not religious people. And so when they established the state of Israel, they established it as a secular state. Yeah. So they're kind of, for the most part, they've always been tolerant, that's a good way to say it, of the religious demographic in Israel, which is only about 15 to 20% at the most. So the government is like, we're not letting you build a temple and start World War III. I mean, that's always been their attitude. So that really is what is missing, the ashes and the political will of the government right now. Those are the last two things that are remaining. I describe in the book how this is the most religious government in the history of Israel. Okay. And so that doesn't guarantee anything, but it does tell you that the demographics within the government itself are changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, following the news, I'm always seeing reoccurring news kind of on a weekly, monthly basis of, this member of the Knesset, is praying. There's I forgot his name, but there's one guy who kind of always kind of wants to go on the Temple Mount, challenges it, things like that.
In a market here.
Yeah. Yes. I see news about, records being broken about Jews praying on the Temple Mount, things like that. So I'm seeing news like this. I'm seeing like increased fervor almost. I remember me and my friend and our other podcast, Fig Tree Watchers, we actually did a piece on, I think it was Israel 365 News. They shared an article about how a little girl, she was disabled in a wheelchair, couldn't talk, but she actually got help to make this calendar of sacrifices once the third temple is going to be built. So just seeing things like that. And I agree with you. Israel is largely secular. They don't largely believe in the God of the Bible, but you're seeing this kind of resurgence of people going back to saying that, hey, this is important. We have to build a third temple. We have to get back to this. So it's really interesting. I'm curious from your standpoint, talked about the ashes being needed, the political power. What are your thoughts on needing for Israel to retrieve, the Ark of the Covenant? Do they know the location? There's always talks about that with different Bible prophecy teachers. So I just want to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, there's big rumors that, like, Graham Hancock, I'm not endorsing him, but, he's done a lot of work on, and others about the Ark of the Covenant being in Ethiopia. Others, according to the book of 2 Maccabees, that the Ark was taken by Jeremiah at the time of the Babylonian captivity over to Mount Nebo. That's one. Others believe that maybe it's down in Qumran based on the copper scroll. Others we'll say it's underneath the Temple Mount in some of the catacombs or the caverns there, Jeremiah's grotto and other places. So there's a lot of rumors around it. And what the rabbis will say today is, hey, look, we know exactly where it is. And when the time comes, when the temple's built, we'll have it.
Yeah.
Now, is that true? I have no
No.
idea. But this is what they're claiming. So, I mean, even in the first, well, I'll say this, even in the second temple, in the time of Jesus, I'm not saying the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. There's just no evidence that it was. There's no biblical proof, certainly making reference to the Ark being there. Kind of bit. So we also know in Jeremiah 3:16 that there's coming a point in the future where the Ark wouldn't even come to memory. Now, is that referring to the millennial period or the church period? We don't really know, but what they say they have it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what we're.
Let's take it with a grain of salt. So,
yep.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Another question here is, what are your thoughts on where the third temple will be rebuilt? Because right now, obviously, there's huge tension for the Temple Mount, right? We have the Muslims and their mosque there, and obviously Christians want to pray there, and Muslim or Jews want to pray there as well. So do you believe that the third temple will be built on the Temple Mount? There's others saying, I believe that'll be rebuilt in like the city of David, or there's so what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, the city of David idea, it's kind of gained some resurgence, in the last 10, 15 years. It gained its most notoriety in the 90s by a book written by Ernest Martin called The Temples That Jerusalem Forgot.
Okay.
And at that time, he wrote that he believed, based on the writings of Josephus and others, that the original temple existed in the city of David. Mm-hmm. Now, you could get away with that barely in the 1990s. But ever since Eilat Mazar, who led, she just passed away recently, the last couple of years, she's done decades of work in the city of David, excavating there. And so what we know today about the city of David is 100 times more than what we knew in the early 90s. Yeah. And so based on all the excavations that have taken place in the city of David, and it's all documented by, professional archaeologists, it's impossible, truly impossible that the temple would be there. There's absolutely zero evidence that it existed. In fact, they found David's palace and other things, but nothing related to the temple at all. And because it's been so excavated now, all the way down, to the Iron Age, to the late Iron Age, 1000 BC. That tells us that for the temple to be there, the temple was relatively large, especially because we understand Herod's description or Josephus's description of what Herod the Great did. So all those walls and all the retaining walls and everything that Josephus describes, that's nowhere to be found down in the city of David. It's zero. And so I think we can eliminate that. Every time we talk about this, some people says, yeah, but the temple's in the city of David. And unfortunately, they're just unfamiliar with all the latest archaeology of the last 20 years. Yeah. And so just not the case. The other options are south of the Dome of the Rock, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. I don't really see that as being, archaeologically valid. Now, let me say this too, that ever since 1967, when Israel gave, I would say, local control back to the Jordanians, no one can say prior to that they've done archaeology there. There was some archaeology that was done in the late 1800s by Charles Ward and others, Robinson and stuff, and they did a lot of things around it, and then they tried to get under it and stuff like that. But there's never really been any major archaeology done on top of the Temple Mount. And so people who make claims that there's a little bit of reluctance to embrace it. But the three options are: it's south of the Dome of the Rock, on the Dome of the Rock, or where the Dome of the Rock is, or just to the north of the Dome of the Rock. And at the end of the day, could there be, if there was, let me say it this way, the typical standard conventional idea is that the Dome of the Rock is where it's at. Mm-hmm. Now, so that means that for the Jews to build it, they're going to have to destroy the Dome of the Rock. Or maybe there's an earthquake. Yeah. Maybe it's the earthquake of Ezekiel 38, 39. Some people talk about that, destroys it. And therefore, it shows God's in it, and then they build the temple. Nobody knows the scenario. Interestingly, if if there was a opportunity for archaeology to be done on the Temple Mount, let's say through political agreement, it's possible then that it can be verified that it is to the north of the Dome of the Rock, or on the Dome of the Rock. So I think that the location is still up for grabs, so to speak, even in the minds of the rabbis. I mean, the typical idea right now, again, the conventional idea is that it's there, and the Dome of the rock that's sitting inside the dome, is the very rock that Isaac was offered on. And so, and then there are pictures going back before there was all the political tension. Lean Rittmeyer was another very scholarly individual that did a lot on the archaeology of Jerusalem itself. And but at the end of the day, it's a long-winded answer to say it's still open for debate. But those are the options.
No, thank you for clarifying, because that was something I've always wanted to dig into as well. And I just, I don't have the credentials or the knowledge and the know-how to really look into that and to know where it could be built and whatnot. But your answer makes sense. So that's something for, I believe, everybody listening today to consider. So yeah.
And it's big. Let me just say, it's big. The Temple Mount's 37 acres.
Yeah, it's huge.
So to have to build the temple just to the north of the Dome of the Rock, I've actually seen some architectural plans showing the temple being north of the Dome of the Rock, and there's a huge 20-foot wall separating the Dome of the Rock from the temple, the coming temple. Yep. So there's a lot of room there. There's no problem in having this, even a trifecta of religion, so to speak, on the Temple Mount area.
Yeah, and we definitely know that's where things are going with this ecumenical movement.
Exactly.
And so as we wrap up, we just have two last questions for you. Do you believe that Christians should be supporting the building of the third temple? And then where can we find your book and then follow you?
The questions I asked in there were, should we be excited about it? In the book, I asked, should we be excited about this? Should Christians support it? And is it possible that God would be providentially allowing all this stuff to happen? And so I'll clarify all those. My response was, well, I'm not excited about the red heifer itself. Yep. I'm excited about these events. I'm not excited about the third temple itself. I'm excited that these things, the Bible says they're going to happen, at least as it relates to the third temple. The red heifer is an inference. I'm excited for what's coming after, and that is Jesus's return. Yeah. And so when we see these things, Jesus describes all of them, and he gives a context. When you see these things, lift up your head, your redemption is drawing near. And so, that specifically is in the context inside the tribulation, but nevertheless, it's still true if you see that there. The second thing is, I don't want to condemn anybody for, supporting the temple. That's between them and the Lord. Would I do it personally? No, I wouldn't, because I would rather, if I was going to be a steward of God's money, which we all are, I would rather give it to those ministries that maybe help tangibly people that I've given money to Israeli citizens and other areas where you're helping the poor and other things. If you want to bless Israel, you can bless Israel. Also, I've given money to Chosen People Ministries and Jews for Jesus. I've done ministry with both of them, at least Chosen People, because why? We want the Jews to be saved, and the only way they're saved is through Jesus. I mean, the temple is not going to save them. God is not going to endorse the temple because Jesus is the final sacrifice. And so Jesus said clearly, look, I'm the way, the truth, and life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. So the Jewish people cannot get to the Father through the temple, through Moses. They only can get to the Father through Jesus. And so that's super important. And I think as we think about that and we kind of summarize, each person's going to do what they're going to do. Is it a sin? That's between them and the Lord on it. But personally, I would rather see them come to salvation through Jesus than spending money on a temple that actually is a path. It's a path of deception that they don't realize it. They're doing what they think is right, which is to go back to Moses. It's no different than John chapter 5 when they said, we have Moses to Jesus. We don't need you. And Jesus said, well, if you believed in Moses, you'd follow me because he wrote about me in John chapter 5. So that's the same debate today. And so at the end of the day, the goal is to point it back to the Son of God, to the Messiah, their Messiah, and ours as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So again, brother, thank you so much. How can people get your book and where should people follow you?
Yeah, the best, you can get my book if you want to support a Christian ministry at prophecywatchers.com. I do have it on Amazon as well if you want to support Jeff Bezos, but nevertheless, We have, if you go to prophecywatchers.com, you can go, there's a tab that says where to watch and listen. And we have a variety of things all over the place that we're working on. And it's good.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun to go out and point people to Jesus and the gospel and his coming.
Yeah. Brother, again, thank you so much for coming on. It's a blessing. I'm sure for those who are going to listen and watch this later, it's going to be a blessing to them. You've really cleared up a lot of questions for us, so we really appreciate it. So hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Glad being here.